Democrat leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, on Friday, Senators Flake, Collins, and Murkowski, joined by Democratic Senators Coons, Klobuchar, and others, made the only fair move to demand the FBI investigate the credible allegations of sexual misconduct by Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. It was the right thing to do. Fair to both Dr. Blasey Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. For too long, Republicans have rushed this process forward and likely would have rushed to a final vote if not for the prudent bipartisan efforts of those senators to demand a full FBI investigation. What's important now is for the FBI investigation to be serious, impartial, and thorough, to ferret out the facts and do so quickly. That means interviewing all of the relevant witnesses and accepting corroborating accounts when they come forward. It also means following up on any leads that emerge from the process of the investigation. The FBI has ample resources to do this within the 1-week period requested by the members of the Judiciary Committee. No one is asking it take longer than a week, but everyone is asking it be done thoroughly and completely within that week. There is concern that the White House has placed severe constraints on the investigation, and until today, the President tried to dodge that responsibility, the White House even saying that the Senate is somehow responsible for the scope of the investigation. Let me be clear. The Senate has no control over the scope of an FBI investigation of this sort. Only the White House. Now, a few hours ago, I was glad to hear President Trump say that he would like to see Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh interviewed by the FBI as part of this investigation, and that the FBI should be able to interview anyone appropriate. We have to make sure now that those comments reflect what the White House has officially told the FBI. Democratic senators, led by Ranking Member Feinstein, have asked the White House what parameters it's giving to the FBI, but we haven't yet received a reply. So we need an official document from the White House, made public, so the whole country knows what the scope is, and it should outline the scope of the investigation. We ask the President, if you are truly giving the FBI the ability to follow the facts wherever they lead, show us. Show us what White House counsel Don McGahn has instructed the FBI. Because prior to President Trump's off-the-cuff comments in the Rose Garden, there were rumors that the majority staff of the Judiciary Committee were drawing up limited interview lists for the FBI and otherwise circumscribing the investigation. Partisan staffers on the Judiciary Committee should not exercise any constraints over this investigation. Democratic staffers asked the Republican majority staff to get on the phone with Counsel McGahn to discuss what should be the parameters, and they were told, forget it. It's the same partisan staff that has blocked documents, that has operated in a purely partisan way, that couldn't come up with an agreement when these things had always been done in a bipartisan way. And so to let the partisan Senate staff on the Republican side dictate the terms of this investigation would be wrong. And ultimately, President Trump knows and Counsel McGahn knows the buck stops with the White House. It is only they who can instruct the FBI. And now that the President has said he wants a full investigation, that he wants both Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh interviewed, we assume that will happen. But we want to make sure that Mr. McGahn tells the FBI just that. The Senate and the American people deserve to know what is the scope of the investigation, because this investigation must be done in a manner that allows the public to have confidence in its findings. Whether you are for or against Judge Kavanaugh going to the Supreme Court, it will only benefit the country if the investigation is regarded as fair, clear, and not constrained particularly by partisan means. For that reason, we hope the FBI will be available to brief the Senate on the results of the investigation before a final floor vote. Democrats are not interested in delay for the sake of delay. This can all be completed quickly, but it must be done right. Mr. President, we're a society based on the rule of law. It's therefore crucial the American people have faith in the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court. Our job as senators is to decide if someone has the intelligence, the temperament, the independence, and the credibility to earn the title of justice for a lifetime. Character matters. Character matters deeply. Anyone who watched the Judiciary Committee hearing on Thursday should have serious, if not disqualifying, doubts about Judge Kavanaugh's credibility and independence, qualities we should expect in any Supreme Court justice. First, let me address the nominee's independence. After Dr. Blasey Ford's courageous, polite, detailed, and credible testimony to the committee, Judge Kavanaugh embarked on a partisan screed, angrily implicating sitting U.S. senators in a conspiratorial plot to destroy his nomination. He even had the temerity to label the recent allegations a part of some revenge of the Clintons, an absurd, shop-worn boogeyman of partisan Republicans from the Gingrich era on forward. And that was from Judge Kavanaugh's prepared opening statements. When questioned, Judge Kavanaugh impugned the motives of sitting senators, rudely interrupting and dismissing questions in a way I've never seen tolerated from a witness. Judge Kavanaugh asked a Democratic member of this chamber whether she had ever blacked out from drinking, an offensive question asked by a nominee who was there to provide answers, not evade answers by asking very nasty questions. It's quite clear from Thursday's testimony, Judge Kavanaugh harbors deep, deep partisan resentments. That's not the kind of justice we need on the Supreme Court. I must say, this isn't the first time I thought that Judge Kavanaugh was too partisan. When he came before the Judiciary Committee in 2004 and 6, I noted that he was involved in every major legal partisan fight of the Clinton and Bush eras, from Ken Starr to Bush v. Gore, from torture to signing statements to Mandy Miranda's theft of Democratic emails. I wondered then, as I do today, whether we should promote a loyal partisan warrior to a position that calls for independence and judiciousness. Frankly, Judge Kavanaugh's testimony was a stunning display of partisanship and recrimination that solidified my skepticism about his objectivity and independence. I understand these issues are emotional. I understand that his character was being questioned. But rather than provide sincere and measured testimony in his defense, which would have been far more effective, Judge Kavanaugh revealed that his worldview is skewed by a very partisan lens. And let me address probably the most important question about Judge Kavanaugh, his credibility. President Trump has suggested it doesn't matter what someone did 36 years ago in high school. Whatever view you take of that notion, I believe, given the seriousness of what Dr. Ford said, it should matter. But the question of Judge Kavanaugh's credibility is one that weighs on us today, on his behavior right now. It is not a question about what Judge Kavanaugh did as a 16 or 17-year-old, but what he said as a 53-year-old nominee to the court. The harsh fact of the matter is that we have mounting evidence that Judge Kavanaugh is just not credible. He has dissembled about the Bush administration's policy on torture, the nomination of controversial judges, grand jury proceedings, and the theft of Democratic emails. Thursday's hearing provided fresh examples of Judge Kavanaugh's difficult relationship with the truth. Judge Kavanaugh gave answers about his yearbook page supposed drinking games, and high school behavior that simply defy credulity. Judge Kavanaugh said he, quote, never, unquote, drank so much that he forgot events, a characterization that does not track with multiple descriptions made by many high school and college classmates. So the $64,000 question is this: is Judge Kavanaugh credible? Will Judge Kavanaugh say anything, deny anything, mislead about anything to secure confirmation to the Supreme Court? Does he have the integrity, the independence, the credibility to do the job? Does Judge Kavanaugh deserve the promotion of a lifetime, for a lifetime? These very serious questions about Judge Kavanaugh's state of mind and who he is today, not who he was in 1982, should weigh on the conscience of every senator. In my experience with Judge Kavanaugh, in 2004, 2006, and again throughout this process, I have been left with the impression that Judge Kavanaugh would dissemble, mislead, even prevaricate senators, even prevaricate about everything from the momentous to the mundane, whatever it takes to cast his nomination in the most favorable light. Faced now with the gravest of allegations and the sincere testimony of a very courageous woman, I believe the Senate should consider the issue of credibility to be front and center in deciding whether Judge Kavanaugh deserves a seat on the bench, an appointment, a lifetime appointment to the most important court in the land. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
The confirmation process for Judge Brett Kavanaugh, one of the most qualified and most impressive Supreme Court nominees in our nation's history, is moving forward. On Friday, the Judiciary Committee reported this nomination favorably. Then here on the floor, we officially moved to take up the nomination. Every Republican member of the committee agreed that Judge Kavanaugh should be reported out with a favorable recommendation, and every Democrat voted in opposition. And in some cases, before he or anyone had even been nominated. And they didn't mince any words, Mr. President. The way one Democratic member of the Judiciary Committee put it, supporters of Judge Kavanaugh are, quote, listen to this, complicit in the evil. That's a Democratic member of the Judiciary Committee. Another Democrat on the committee, before Judge Kavanaugh was even named, described in almost apocalyptic terms the consequences of whomever the president might nominate. Here was the quote: we're looking at the destruction of the Constitution of the United States, as far as I can tell. And here was the Democratic leader, just hours after Judge Kavanaugh was nominated. I will oppose him with everything I've got. Well, they've certainly done just that. They've done just that. The ranking Democrat on the committee first heard from Dr. Ford on July the 30th. Did our colleague alert the chairman so the committee could do due diligence in a confidential way, consistent with Dr. Ford's wishes? No, she did not. Did she discreetly raise the issue with Judge Kavanaugh during her private meeting with him on August the 20th? She didn't do that either. As best we can tell, the Democrats chose to keep this allegation secret rather than investigating in a bipartisan and timely way. In fact, Mr. President, they held it in reserve. But meanwhile, the senior senator from California or her office were already in communication with Dr. Ford. In fact, her office had already recommended Dr. Ford retain a particular Washington, D.C. law firm. Now, Mr. President, the firm in question is not exactly foreign to Democratic politics. Two of its founding partners, including one of the attorneys who personally appeared at the hearing to represent Dr. Ford, had until recently been scheduled to hold a fundraiser for one of our Senate Democratic colleagues tonight. Oh, and by the way, the firm had also represented in another matter the person who has made the most salacious and disgusting accusations against Judge Kavanaugh as a high school student. This is the firm the Judiciary Committee Democrats recommended to Dr. Ford. Not long thereafter, of course, Dr. Ford's letter to the senior senator from California wound up in the hands of the press. The same letter in which she asked for confidentiality was leaked. By whom? As best I can tell, nobody had possession of this letter except for Dr. Ford's Democratic Congresswoman, the Democratic side of the Judiciary Committee, and presumably the politically connected lawyers they recommended to Dr. Ford. And somehow, it ended up in the press. Dr. Ford's plea for privacy was brushed aside. A predictable media circus was launched. Of course, the questionable and concerning handling of this matter didn't stop there. In her testimony, Dr. Ford seemed surprised that Chairman Grassley had offered her legal team a number of more discreet and less burdensome ways to share her story if she preferred. The chairman had offered to fly investigators out to Florida, to California, or anywhere else for a private interview at a time and a place of Dr. Ford's choosing. Apparently, Mr. President, neither of our Democratic colleagues nor the lawyers they recommended felt it was necessary to make these options clear to Dr. Ford. She told the committee, quote, "I wasn't clear on what the offer was. I would have been happy to speak with you out there," referring to California. "It wasn't clear to me that was the case." So, Mr. President, let's take stock of all this. The ranking member withheld serious allegations from committee colleagues, precluding any chance that they would be handled with sensitivity and discretion. Meanwhile, her staff made recommendations that the accuser retain specific politically connected counsel. Then her confidential account reached the media faster than it reached either the chairman of the committee or the FBI, which our colleagues have been insisting must now look into it. And finally, we have reason to believe that Dr. Ford was not even apprised of the chairman's offers to collect her testimony in ways that might have been less likely to create a media circus and less burdensome on her. It's almost as if Dr. Ford didn't want a Washington, D.C.-based media circus, but others with whom she was in contact, on whom she was relying, wanted exactly that. So we've learned that if you confide in Senate Democrats on highly sensitive personal matters, no request for confidentiality will keep you from becoming a household name. And if you're a nominee whose judicial philosophy Senate Democrats deem to be objectionable, no centuries-old standard of presumed innocence will protect your name, your family, or your reputation from irreparable damage. Now, fortunately, Chairman Grassley has taken action to clean up this mess. Last Thursday, he supervised a professional and respectful hearing. He retained an experienced sex crimes prosecutor to methodically collect the details of Dr. Ford's recollections. This is a professional who was recognized as Outstanding Arizona Sexual Assault Prosecutor of the Year by former Democratic Governor Janet Napolitano, a former Cabinet Secretary of President Obama, and herself a member of the Anita Hill legal team back in 1991. Here's what she wrote in her memo to members following the hearing. A he said, she said case is incredibly difficult to prove. But this case is even weaker than that. Dr. Ford identified other witnesses to the event, and those witnesses either refuted her allegation or failed to corroborate them. I do not think that a reasonable prosecutor would bring this case based on the evidence before the committee, nor do I think this evidence is sufficient to satisfy the preponderance of evidence standard. That is a lower standard. So will our Democratic colleagues listen to this expert opinion, although it conflicts with their political mission? Don't hold your breath. Nor am I optimistic they will stay consistent and accept the conclusions of the supplemental background investigation the FBI is now conducting on top of its 6 prior investigations of Judge Kavanaugh. Democrats demanded a supplemental investigation. They proclaimed it would be a game changer. The Democratic leader and the ranking Democrat on the committee both said recently that an FBI investigation can be completed in less than a week. But, Mr. President, I'd bet almost anything that after it runs its course in the next few days, we will then be treated to a lecture, that anything short of a totally unbounded fishing expedition of indefinite duration is too limited or too arbitrary or somehow insufficient. We all know that's coming. If you listen carefully, Mr. President, you can practically hear the sounds of the Democrats moving the goalposts. Remember, back in the summer, Democrats said there weren't enough documents to get a good sense of Judge Kavanaugh's career. Then we heard there were too many documents. Then once Dr. Ford's private allegation was mysteriously made public, we couldn't possibly move forward until we heard from them both. Then, after neither the hearing nor the statements of supposed witnesses yielded any corroborating evidence, and in fact produced evidence that supported Judge Kavanaugh, we were told only an FBI investigation would resolve this and that it could be done promptly. So let me go out on a limb, Mr. President. Let me make a small prediction. Soon enough, The goalposts will be on the move once again. And I would respectfully say to my colleagues, do these actions suggest this has ever been about finding the truth? Anybody believe that? Do these actions suggest that this has ever been about giving Judge Kavanaugh a fair hearing? This institution has seen before episodes somewhat like what we're now seeing from some of our colleagues across the aisle. Back during the McCarthy era, in fact, in 1950, character assassination and uncorroborated allegations were being utilized in a very different debate in that era. That's when a distinguished senator from Maine named Margaret Chase Smith, an icon from the great state of our colleagues, Senator Collins, went to the Senate floor to say enough was enough. She gave a speech that guaranteed she'd be in the history of the Senate. She titled it Declaration of Conscience. Here's what she said. I do not like the way in which the Senate has been made a rendezvous for vilification, for selfish political gain at the sacrifice of individual reputations and national unity. Margaret Chase Smith went on. Whether it be a criminal prosecution in court or a character prosecution in the Senate, there is little practical distinction when the life of a person has been ruined. We should listen to these words. They speak as loudly today as they did 68 years ago. In my judgment, the pattern of behavior we've seen confirms what Democrats' own public statements have told us. They're committed to delaying, obstructing, and resisting this nomination with everything they've got. They just want to delay this matter past the election. That's not my supposition, Mr. President. That's their plan. According to another Democratic member of the Judiciary Committee, the junior senator from Hawaii, that's their plan. So soon, I expect we'll hear that the conclusions of the expert prosecutor who questioned both witnesses at last week's hearing aren't reliable, or that the FBI's investigation was not infinite or endless enough for their liking. Maybe we'll hear the real issue is not these uncorroborated allegations of misconduct after all, but rather the fact that Judge Kavanaugh, now listen to this, drank beer in high school and in college. Or the fact that he was rightfully angry. Who wouldn't be? That his good name and his family have been dragged through the mud with a campaign of character assassination based on allegations that lack any corroboration. Who wouldn't be angry about that, Mr. President? Their goalposts keep shifting, but their goal hadn't moved an inch, not an inch. The goal's been the same all along. And so let me make it very clear. The time for endless delay and obstruction has come to a close. Judge Kavanaugh's nomination is out of committee. We're considering it here on the floor. And Mr. President, we'll be voting this week.